Good morning, everybody. If you had been at Boeing Field in Seattle on this date, July 28, back in 1935, you might have noticed a strange airplane taxiing down the runway on its first test flight. Boeing called it the Model 299, but we know it as one of the great heavy bombers of our Army Air Corps in World War II, the B-17 Flying Fortress. Here's a photograph of the Martin B-10 bomber from 1935, arguably our first modern long-distance bomber, but soon after it was built, the Army Air Corps realized it needed a plane that could travel farther and carry a heavier bomb load. So it asked the major airplane producers to submit a design for a new bomber, and this was Boeing's, the 299. This is a picture of it when it made its test flight on this date, July 28, 1935. You'll notice it has the word Boeing on it. The first flight went okay. The second flight crashed. The pilots were killed, but eventually the Army Air Corps did adopt the design submitted by Boeing. It got its name Flying Fortress from a Seattle newspaperman who was at the test flight and was struck by all the machine guns on the airplane, front and back, the sides, top and bottom. So here's a picture of the Battle of Britain. Early in World War II, before we got in, the Brits and the Germans were fighting over the skies of Britain, and we were not involved, but we were watching this with some interest. When we do get involved, and here's a picture of B-17s in formation, we had very little experience compared to the Germans. The Germans were really good. And in those early years, when we were attacking ball bearing factories and other industrial sites or oil refineries, the casualty rates were quite high for our air crews. We were just getting slaughtered for lots of reasons, and one of them was flak. Here's a picture of our B-17s going through flak. The flak was set to explode at a certain altitude, so when the airplanes got in their position, the shells were exploding right at their altitude because they couldn't just leave the formation. And then another scary thing for our guys were the German fighters. The airplanes themselves were very good, and the pilots were really good. They had had a lot of experience, and they had developed some really effective ways of shooting down our airplanes. So the death rate in the early years for our guys was quite high. So here's the Memphis Belle. This was the first B-17 to make it to 25 missions, and this is at a time when the average lifespan of an air crew was 7 to 14 missions. So to make it to 25 was really something. And when these guys made it to 25, they went back home and they toured the country. And in 1944, a documentary was made about the Memphis Belle. And what makes it worth watching is, among other things, the fact that it uses real combat footage, where you can see the Germans trying to shoot down the B-17s and them fighting back. What really turned it around for our heavy bombers was the appearance of the long-distance escort fighter, like the P-51 pictured here, others too, and they were able to accompany our heavy bombers deep into Germany. And that, combined with the ultimate destruction of the German industrial capacity, turned the war around for our air crews. Well, soon after World War II was finished, this movie came out, 12 O'Clock High. It's about Americans on an air base in England during World War II. It uses some of the same real combat footage that the documentary used about the Memphis Belle. And in 1990, this version of the Memphis Belle came out. This was a little more of a Hollywood version, but they did use real B-17s, so it's worth a look. So here I am in front of the Memphis Belle. It had been in Memphis. It got moved to Dayton, Ohio, where the Air Force has its official museum. Dorothy and I were there some months ago, and was really cool was across the aisle from this was a B-24, which was the bomber my dad was in, the other heavy bomber of World War II. Well, it was almost 80 years ago that we entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, and even today we're struck by the heroism and the sacrifice of the men and women who put on the uniform to do their duty.